Welcome to Unlayered, the show where we explore next generation blockchains. I'm your host, Saul, alongside my co host here, Dave, and our usual bullpen guest here, Zen Lama. As you could infer, today is a more informal discussion of recent market events, things we're seeing in the space, reaction to news, things like that. And I think the most topical thing to kick off here with is what happened over the weekend, the Trump assassination attempt, all the mania that's happened around it. And now also people are talking about the VP pick, JD Vance. I think that's probably the first area that, we all probably have some thoughts and ideas on.
Yeah, I guess from my end, I was just like shocked, right? As soon as it happened, that photo, like that's it. It's game
That
over.
legendary
It,
photo that'll be worth a $10 billion NFT. It'll get fractionalized. We'll see. We'll see.
For sure, it's a history book moment, and also you can tell he's a TV guy, can't you? Because even in all that furore, he stands up and he's like, "Whoa, give me the space," and then comes out with his fight bit, which is it's epic. It's truly one of the great moments from any U.S. president. So yeah, huge.
I think, well, now that the dust has settled a little bit, it's acceptable to now talk about what happened in the markets around that, like specifically lots of, meme coins that are related to that event. A lot of people made money on EAR, I think it was called, as well as Fight itself. That was another one that I think is still doing pretty well. And I think that moment is a great example of how crazy crypto is in that you can kind of make a token, or the market will make a token and trade on it, kind of codify the meme, so to speak, into a tradable asset. People can profit off of it. If friends of mine were out that weekend rather, at bars, and they would see people pulling up things like Dex Screener or Phantom Wallet to take advantage of the moment. So that phenomenon is not going away, and it's actually a really interesting use case, case study on what crypto enables, what the primitives we built have enabled. Do you guys have any thoughts on that stuff?
I mean, for me, it's just clear that like social tokens aren't going away. Like we had memes on the internet, like making them tradable is naturally something people already have a appetite for in the market. And like, yeah, I think I like completely understand when people are like a little bit cringe on it. Especially people who have not been in Web3, they're like, oh, why would you trade on that? Like it's like a narrative, something tragic has happened, blah blah blah. But like people are gonna do it anyways. Quite frankly, like prediction markets have existed for a long time, and really all that crypto does is make it more equitable for more people to participate. And so like, yeah, I don't like. To me, it's product market fit in a way. Like you can kind of cringe at why it's product market fit, but it is.
And it's a comment that I made actually in the last episode, but we are now almost creating this decentralized, curated list of trending topics around the world. If there's a hurricane in Florida and a tornado in Southeast Asia and the Queen dies and all these sorts of things, they will be the top trending meme coins. So you're somehow creating this decentralized trending list. But on top of that, of course, you can actually also make 10,000% gains in a day. So it sort of is benefiting off the hottest topics of any particular moment, any particular day, and you can make huge gains from it. As I say, it's not going anywhere. And again, something, Sal, which you mentioned in previous episode, but the form factor that this takes, I'm not sure if PumpFun in its current instantiation is what we're going to be seeing in the future, but there's got to be some sort of form factor which is going to make it easier for normies to get involved. And I think at that point, we're off to the races with like the first crypto social-fi super app.
Yeah. And that's a good point you're making that I want to underscore is crypto enables the decentralization of information markets, because there is that incentive to be the one that launch a thing first, have that go up 10,000%. That incentive is so incredibly strong that people will be extremely quick to coalesce around things that are getting attention, whether it's news, it's funny memes, it's pop culture. That's super valuable. And you kind of see this playbook in the DePIN space with things like, Hive Map or what have you. But this is just a different flavor of it. This is just about attention. The first one to tokenize attention for a specific unit, whether it's news or pop culture, an event. they get rewarded handsomely, and then the benefit is everybody gets to see now at one central view, which maybe it's just literally Deck Screener's homepage, what's relevant these days. That does not really exist today. I think the closest analog might be if you're in the right kind of algo for Twitter, that sort of gets close-ish to that. But still, Twitter is just such a big space, and there's so many different clusters that are getting or essentially populating your feed. I don't think it gets much cleaner than what crypto can do. And that's super powerful, even if it seems silly and weird that from the surface.
Well, even just like as data to power like decentralized social apps, like whether you're trading the thing or not, like seeing what tokens have the highest volume is still like useful feed for like feed data for like a social media platform, right? And this is like the first data feed that's on chain, so like technically, if you had a smart enough LLM, you could like look at what is trading and then like actually populate feed like social feeds, based on trading tokens, right? And this would be completely entirely separate from the actual trading activity. It's just actually a barometer on like where the trading activity is like a very clear cut way of identifying where the attention in the moment is, and that can be fed into, like social apps, right? And then obviously, you can add trading features on top of it. But I do actually think it's just actually a nice data feed for like social apps to like actually have kind of a living, breathing. Like today in Web3, like all of our social apps are very kind of static. They're very skeuomorphic. Nothing really changes in real time or based on what's going on. And so like it's like, okay, well, we have this, most of the data on chain is financial, but at least this can be somewhat of a signal of like what's relevant in the zeitgeist of, crypto Twitter or crypto social media, right?
And you imagine if you're a Twitter trying to collate a trending topics list, I think it's going to be pretty difficult given the amount of bots that you have on Twitter. Whereas at least markets, it is financial. You're actually having to put your money up, and it removes all of that. You can't really sybil it. And also you're leveraging the efficiency of markets rather than just waiting for people to bother to start tweeting about something. There's a real incentive to do it first and to be really, really fast. So I think it will be a more efficient method of curating these lists. I thought the market reaction, as we were saying, to the assassination attempt was interesting, but would we all agree that it's basically the initial reaction was because Trump is suddenly much, much more likely to become president, and he has a much more pro-crypto slant. So therefore, I think that sort of explained that initial bump. I think we saw with Reagan after his assassination attempt, his points jumped by like 20% or something.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably fair. I'm not as close to the metal with markets just from a macro standpoint, but I think it's probably some combination of odds are up. It's a crypto-friendly administration potentially. And then now on top of that, you have the VP nomination. And then on top of that, you have what seems to be the ETH ETFs are going to be trading soon, which kind of came out of nowhere.
I think next Tuesday is the date.
Oh, they announced next Tuesday?
Yeah, it's all like having spoken to someone who's had word from the SEC, but okay. I think they have to make their final application or something on Monday after hours so that it can start trading on Tuesday next week. But I think as you mentioned earlier, the Vance VP pick has been an additional surprise and an additional boost to the market as well, because we're starting to see straight away all of these videos coming up. And he certainly seems to be very knowledgeable about crypto. He certainly seems to be extremely positive about crypto and about people having the right to trade and the right to self-custody. He's certified that he had $250,000 worth of Bitcoin in the past. So maybe people have doubted previously whether Trump is actually going to be genuinely pro-crypto, but I think this is a pretty big statement. And I think that's what the market has been digesting over the last 24 hours. The betting markets for the VP, that seemed to be wide open. I saw a tweet the other day from someone who made like over 10x betting on Vance, and the reason that he went for it was because it's almost exactly the same as Pence, and it's one syllable, and it sounds good when you put it with Trump, and you do wonder.
That's good analysis.
Like,
honestly,
could well be.
That left curve analysis, never seems to miss.
Oh my God, I wish I should have done that. I thought it had something. Do you guys think it had because he pushed the decision so late, the attempt had some impact on who he chose, and maybe this was kind of a last minute change up, or does it seem like this is always going to be the choice?
I haven't been following like the whole decision making that closely, so
He was not the front runner, according to prediction markets. He was never the front runner, as far as I understand, until like the day before or whatever when it was leaking. But that I think is the surprising part to me.
I have given up trying to interpret Trump or general U.S. politics. I've kind of gone full left curve. When I saw
There
that
you go.
meme picture, I was like, That's it. He wins." Like,
Yeah. And I think from a macro perspective as well, it's also going to be happening around the time that they're almost certainly going to be cutting rates. I think speaking to people far more knowledgeable on this subject, it seems pretty inevitable, and people are now even starting to talk about them cutting in July, but the odds of a September cut have gone up to about 95% after the recent numbers have come out. So we're going to be getting rates cuts at around the time that we're getting a Trump presidential appointee and a crypto-friendly vice. So it really does feel like the market, we're seeing it react now. It's the first time it's been mega bullish in about 3-4 months. So yeah, it does feel like the start of the second half, hopefully.
has it really been 3-4 months? I feel like we go from like bullish to bearish every 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. In some ways, we do, depending on who you follow.
It's been a whipsaw. At this point, I'm just like, I got my bags packed. I'm happy.
Maybe going into a different topic, but I was listening to Hasib on the chopping block recently, and the question was around why aren't VCs investing more in apps? And his answer was the only apps which are actually going to be useful, or that we know which are useful, are for payments and DeFi, basically. And every other app out there is just completely unproven. We've had a lot of money put into gaming and various other sectors, social fi. Nothing's really coming to prominence, and therefore there is a chance that actually nothing is going to become useful. And I think this sort of ties in with a general apathy that we've been seeing in the market, and also ties in with our point that everyone's been flipping bullish and bearish, but the timeline really is pretty down and despondent because we just haven't really seen much ingenuity, creativity brought forward this bull market. So I was just wondering whether you guys had any thoughts on, do we think that any other asset class is actually going to come out of this? Do we think social fi is probably the most likely? Or any other asset classes which we're hopeful can sort of break out, and so it's not just payments and DeFi.
I actually think the product categories are pretty well defined now, and it is more of a matter of like risk analysis and like with no clear like regulations and stuff. I think like it may just be a holding pattern right now, right? Especially with how close it looks like the U.S. government is to like passing some laws here in the next year or two. I do imagine once clarity on that comes out, people will be much more aggressive about picking who the winning like payments app is going to be, the winning DeFi is going to be, right? Because at that right point, you can bet big. There's some like guardrails on it, and I think for the most part, like the tried and true product market fit categories are pretty obvious, right? It is very much more like a regulation thing. I do feel like SocialFi has this energy around it this cycle, in the same way that like NFTs did last cycle. But like whether that breaks out to like a winner in this cycle, I'm not 100% sure. But I'd love to hear Sal's take.
So I think he's kind of partially right, Hasib, that is, in that consumer is very unproven in crypto. Basically, every consumer app has not really worked out, especially gaming. But gaming aside, gaming is interesting just because what's happening in TON, and that is objectively working by every measure. We can kind of talk about that. But just in general, even like the ones that were successful at one point, like FriendTech, are now down, 99% or whatever. They've essentially given up, where they stopped working on the L2 or whatever it was that they were working on. FriendChain. The rumors are it's basically over. It's dead. And that actually sort of had some PMF for a while. It sort of had mainstream attention. The way I see it is consumer apps in crypto must use crypto. That's it. It's that simple. If they aren't creating assets or trading assets, then there is literally no point to use crypto. And I've always been bearish this idea, still to this day, But with the thesis behind Forecaster and Lens, which is let's put everything on chain, I don't think that makes a better product. I actually don't think it's possible to make a better product when you put all the data on chain, because people that are working hard to build these companies, they want to keep the data. And so there's always going to be incentive misalignment there. They benefit from kind of owning the data and getting unique insights out of it, being able to have proprietary technology built on top of that data. And on top of that, you have the incumbents, your Twitters of the world. They're just always going to be so much better than what you could possibly do with a decentralized version of Twitter, which is essentially what Forecaster is, depending on what client you use, but that's essentially where everything's fallen so far. So let's look at PumpFun, right? Like, what did they do different? That's literally a consumer app. What do they do differently? You can create a token, and it has some replies below it. It has some social features. That's an example of a very rudimentary one. Maybe it's like the MySpace or Craigslist of crypto consumer, but that is, those ingredients are there. Now people are looking to trade pump tokens. That ends up being one of the most commonly used features in interfaces like Photon or BullX. It's the Pump Vision view. So that's the way people should be thinking, is how do we use crypto assets as a primitive to enable unique social behaviors, not how do we just abstract data and shove it on a blockchain for no reason. Blockchains, to me, are really useful for things that are inherently financialized. The farther we get away from that, the less likely I think it is for a consumer app to succeed.
How do you feel about, like, maybe not the data's on chain, but the ownership or the attestation to the data is on chain? How do you feel about those type of use cases?
I think it's interesting, but only from the perspective of provenance, where you have provable provenance. And one of the examples I always used whenever, I would do other podcasts or what have you, is if the three of us play Call of Duty and I get to 10 prestige or whatever, and I'm very good at the game, I have a very high KD or whatever metric you want to measure, it would be great if that was on chain. No one owns it. It's just essentially like just provably out there. And then 10 years later, when they make the rebooted version, I can prove that it was me who did those amazing things back then, because any developer can tap into on-chain data, even if they sold the game a million times and the servers are down, they make new servers, et cetera, et cetera. That to me is cool. But in that sense, no one really owns the data. It's just, open. You're just open sourcing the access to that data instead of it living in a database that gets shut down one day. That sort of metadata is just now publicly available.
And you mentioned earlier about FriendTech having struggled. I was checking it earlier, and it's down about 90% from its highs. It's down to about 25 million FDV. So in a world where Pump.Fun has done incredibly well, FriendTech was also, you had the ability to create keys out of nothing, which were then tradable. So why do you think that it has suffered so poorly compared to Pump.Fun, which is sort of continuing to just go up and to the right? What do you think were the key differences that maybe they didn't get quite right?
They're inherently different products. FriendTech should have succeeded in some capacity. The issue with FriendTech, I think it mostly has to do with incentives, the product itself. It never got better. It was, it's remarkable. It was actually a very crude product, a lot of bugs. And in spite of that, they made $50 million. In spite of that, lots of people used it, and it never got better. Months and months passed by. They released V2. It's essentially the same buggy V1 with a couple new features, clubs, presidents, what have you. So I think it's more of an execution thing. I think the idea was great. It'll get tested again. Even like derivatives, I don't want to say derivative, but like ideas that were inspired by FriendTech, and I guess PumpFun in some way, it's like Time.Fun, they catch spurts of adoption. The other issue, I think, which is harder to solve, is when will Apple allow crypto payments to kind of get around the 30% tax? I don't know when or if that's happening anytime soon. PWAs can only get you so far. But still, I think you can get a mainstream app that is not a native app. So I don't think that is the blocker. I just think it makes it a little bit harder because a lot of consumer-oriented founders just are used to building native apps. But PumpFun, that's just a different product, right? That's just, hey, I can get in early on something that goes up 10,000x. That's the appeal, is you get to be first or among the first. You can be rewarded handsomely. And it's those headlines like the guy who bought ear on PumpFun at 14K market cap and it ran at 20 million market cap. That was not really possible before because you didn't have visibility into the creation of the token. You basically only heard of it once it hit maybe 500K market cap. So, both are good products and they both do different things.
I'll tell you another inherent difficulty I think you have with FriendTech is it comes back to this meme coins versus NFTs. And that's basically what FriendTech is. It's trying to sell the NFTs. And then after a while, it just gets a bit too expensive. And people are saying, well, do I want to spend $2,000, $10,000 just to get access to a room? Is it really worth that? You just run into that wall that everyone else does. Whereas when it comes to meme coins, as we know, you can still spend $10 when it's gone up 100x. Or you can invest large amounts of money. But it's just, yeah, it stops that mental barrier. And you only need to look at the NFT market caps to see how big they've gotten compared to meme coins, and it's like 1/100th of the size. So I think it's a difficult problem to solve because I think token gating is great, but as soon as you token gate, you're setting a price on access, especially if that price is going to be going up exponentially, i.e. even if you did it with meme coins, you could say, okay, 10,000 of this meme coin gets you access, but if the price is 1,000x, then suddenly it becomes too expensive. So yeah, it's I think maybe one way around, and I think PumpFun should really lean more into this, is just anyone who's bought any amount of a meme coin gets access. And I really think they should be leaning hard into that, having private areas, having easier to do the live streams and the videos from the creators of these meme coins and just create communities, because I think that's going to be the core basis of the crypto social fi app that goes huge. Is one where you can create communities around meme coins, not NFTs.
Yeah, I mean, meme coin UX is arguably better than NFT UX, but kind of as a corollary, do we think NFTs are ever coming back? What's our take on that?
I was listening to Raoul Powell, and he says, like, in the rest of the world for the last 50 years, everyone's just invested into real estate, property, and art, high-end art. That's where everyone's wanted to store their money. And you could see property being potentially the L1 tokens, and then high-end art being CryptoPunks and a few other select projects. So I think that's maybe my basis. The other one would be if there's a high utility, if you're going to be able to get tokens from it. Mad Lads, potentially one day there'll be an airdrop for their centralized exchange. Plus, you're obviously getting other airdrops. So that utility piece, I think, is the other strong argument. But a general euphoric NFT run where people are minting 1,000 a day, I struggle to see it. What do you think, sir?
Man, those memories of the NFT bull run. I don't know.
I mean, man,
I don't want to
fun.
It was
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
It was more fun than meme coins, maybe.
In some ways, I think they were better. They were more community oriented. It's very hard to just, have a meetup for guys that hold like, I don't know, PopCat, right? Like no one cares. They're just bags to people. They're in it to sell right away. There's no point of pride around meme coins generally, but yeah, I hope they come back. It's hard for me to see them bounce back elegantly just after how spectacularly they failed last time with all the celebs that were rocking Bored Ape PFPs, those cringe commercials, and the conferences that no one showed up to, the lack of a VIP line for like Ape Fest or something like that. I don't know, there's a lot of memes that have been made now. The one bright spot though is Pudgy Penguins. They've done a phenomenal job. They've rocketed to be one of the top tier collections, and they're now going to do an L2, which I don't really understand that part. But on the Penguin side, really brilliant strategy, and there's a lot to kind of look at there with the gifts, with the merch. It really is now a kind of a pop culture symbol that the NFTs are just one piece of. And if you study what's happening in collectibles industry is not declining. I mean, it's a big industry. There's trading card games that are very popular. There's new ones coming out seemingly every few years that have lots of usage. Even Pokemon cards, they still fetch very high prices. So the collectible space is doing great. It's just the NFT side, the digitization of those has fallen off a rock. But it seems it seems like a bad idea to bet against that forever, just because they're much better versions of collectibles. You can guarantee authenticity. They don't get damaged ever. You can carry all of them with you. You can send them instantly. They have all the attributes that collectibles have, but digital. But it's just going to take some time, I think, for people to figure out the right mix of ingredients here. There needs to be more culture and more, I think, around some of these collections versus just, making it a bunch of apes that have different traits that have no utility or purpose. So I don't know. There's a lot of thoughts in there, but I think they will absolutely come back. They kind of have to. It's just, I don't have too many guesses on what that looks like other than leaning on the collectibles and TCG space.
Yeah, we've been talking to some dApps that are doing like in real live incentivization through NFTs, which I think was really slept on last cycle. And so the NFT is more of just almost like an identity badge. But then you get like benefits from meeting certain people or doing certain activities and stuff. And I think leaning into that social aspect of the NFTs, which is where people really had fun last cycle anyways, like makes a lot more sense, right? Where the asset is more of like a, I don't know, like a POAP or for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
Not like
it's
a
a more
speculative
useful
thing.
POAP, but like, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's another delineation I'll quickly make is NFTs are worse than meme coins as speculation in every sense of the word. They're not fractional. They have capped supply, capped issuance, and they're clunky. And so they're so clunky, entire companies were built around just treating everything like a floor NFT. But they're much easier to understand for regular people because they're like objects. They have pictures. I think one of the best use cases of them to this day, in some ways, is non-transferable NFTs, the Saga Genesis token. It got people excited. Hey, I can prove these 20,000 people bought a phone and I could do something with them. I can give them free stuff. That's super powerful and has nothing to do with speculation or trading them.
Yeah. That like defining a social network around something, I think is actually incredibly useful.
I also think that there's something to be said for the timeline for these things because, as Sal says, NFTs aren't great for speculation. And if we think about collectibles in the real world, like my parents were antique dealers, I was following the Banksy market. These things take decades, if not hundreds of years, to really, really build up to the huge valuations which we see. And I think that the crypto mind is so frazzled from meme coins and everything pumping and dumping in the space of a day that they don't appreciate that. I think CryptoPunks in 20 years, in 50 years, are going to suddenly start to look very, very different than how they do now because it's too fresh at the moment. But once the crypto generation are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, hopefully sitting on a decent amount of wealth and looking back at the good old times, I just think they're going to have their renaissance. But I don't think we can necessarily rely upon NFTs sticking to this 4-year cycle and pumping 100x in the space of a week. But I think CryptoPunks are going to be worth an awful lot of money in 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at, well, actually, that's an interesting point because now that I'm thinking about it, if you study kind of the most valuable comics, for instance, I think one of them is the first comic that Superman appeared in. I think it's called an Action One. That goes for like a bad grade on it, like a low 3, 4, 5 out of 10 will go for 2 million plus. Why? Because there's only like 12 of them or 20 of them in the world. With CryptoPunks, it's interesting. Some of them do get lost, but I think there's not as much degradation. Same with antiques or trading cards. It's so hard to get someone to keep something in good condition, but an NFT, there is no concept of degradation. There's just lost addresses. So perhaps that might make it harder for them to appreciate in price, but I don't know. Then you have to balance it with losing wallets. And that stuff, though, is harder to prove that it happened. You just have no idea.
Yeah, because at least with the comic, you could find it up in your attic after 40 years at the bottom of a pile of stuff, as you're clearing out your granddad's attic. Whereas NFTs, if your granddad had it in his wallet and he's dropped dead, no one's getting it. So yeah, I definitely see a point, and I think it's valid. And certainly that degradation piece, there's not going to be this concept of the quality of the NFT. At most, it might be whether someone famous has held it in the past.
Yeah, provenance stuff.
But and of course, the other piece is what the traits, what the characteristics of the NFT. I suppose it's built in that respect, isn't it?
Sure.
Do we want to talk about Monad maybe? I was only because I was recently seeing a poll from Fiscantes, and he said which one of the hyped new chains are we excited by, and he had MegaEth, Berachain, and Monad came last. So, Zen, I'm sorry to tell you.
Oh, I didn't see this poll. I didn't
Awkward.
vote in this poll.
Needed to round up the troops.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. How are you feeling about those other launches, MegaEth and Berachain? I do feel like they're starting to build up a really big amount of hype on the timeline. They're obviously L2s as opposed to an L1, so more
Wait, hold on.
ETH aligned.
Berachain's
What is
an L1.
MegaEth? What is MegaEth?
MegaEth, I think they are just absolutely like going hell to leather on the validators. They're basically saying, okay, they're all centralized at the moment, centralized sequencers, but they're just saying, okay, we're just going to go mega on the validator requirements because it's only us running it. And
It's basically the most centralized version of an L2 possible to juice every inch of scalability out of it. So,
But
I-
like they're both claiming they're going to help L2s, but are they also an L2? I just don't understand. They
They
call
are
this
an
well,
L2.
so
L2.
Berachain's an L1.
And Berachain's
That's right.
L1. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, Berachain's a Cosmos-based L1. MegaEth
That's EVM
is...
compatible, so they catch both
Yeah.
narratives.
Yeah, but they're not parallelized EVM. Their whole claim to fame is like proof of liquidity, which I have my doubts whether that works in a bear market, but we'll see.
Can you give us a high level of what the concept is?
I'm like not the best person to describe it because I'm not the deepest there, but the general concept is like the validators are the LP pools for every asset on the chain. I think there's some permissioning to be a validator or to get access to the LP though, which is kind of weird. But like essentially it allows like every app on the chain to tap into LP pools like across the chain for different assets. The thing about an LP is that like, it's paired against an asset. And in an up market, that's great. You're getting the things that are going up, but in a down market, like the validator's going to be left holding the bag as everyone's like selling into it. And so like, I mean, it might work. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I haven't done analysis on this, but like my general thinking is like that doesn't work in a bear market. But like do not take my word as authority on that. Like I have not done any like rigorous analysis.
Okay, and then going back to MegaEth, so what are your thoughts, Zen, on sort of maxing out the centralization of the L2? Because I think the pushback obviously would be it is inheriting in some way or another the security of the L1, and therefore it makes complete sense to max out the centralization of the L2.
I don't know. It just feels like a little bit of like an abandonment of ETH values for like performance gain, and so it makes me a little bit like, okay, wait, so you were like hating on all the centralized chains before, but now you're going to love MegaEth just because it's an L2, but it's like literally doing everything that you said that like no L1 should do, but like it's okay because it's an L2, which I guess is an argument to be made that it isn't okay for an L2. But I just go back to like some of these security properties don't hold as an L2, like they only hold like if your token is native on the L2, you don't get the protection from the L1. Like you have to launch your token on the L1 and bridge it to the L2. That's the point. Because you want like the native assets fork choice to be on the L1, right? So like and that's for every L2. That's not for MegaEth versus any other. But I guess where I get concerned with MegaEth is like if you really are trying to settle like 100,000 transactions per second on a layer that settles every 15 to 20 seconds, that's, like 150,000 transactions, like per second, times what, 10 seconds. So like 1.15 million transactions of economic value that are waiting to be settled. Like the amount of in-flight economic value there that you're trying to secure with a proof is like a lot. We have never seen that happen to any L2. Like what happens when there's $10 billion in flight? Like the incentives to like lie on a fraud proof or something can become like very high, like maybe higher than the economic security, like actually securing that proof. Right. And so like, I don't know what happens. Like the game theoretical piece of that to me is like, I don't know. Like there could be real incentive to break the fraud at that point because the amount of economic value in flight that you could earn from it is just huge. There's also like questions just around like, look, RPCs and indexers can't support something that fast right now. So like what ETH like block like scanner is going to keep up with that? It's not going to happen. Like already at 10K TPS, like we're seeing a lot of problems, right? There's also like problems around DA. Like no DA layer is actually spec'd to actually support the amount of DA that they're trying to settle. So I'm like, where like I know you're saying EigenDA, but if you go look at EigenDA specs, like they do not match like your own numbers. I mean, there was an article that came out of this pretty recently. And it was actually like taken down yesterday. I don't know why, but there was like literally a Substack from someone who is like a MegaEth guy who was like, I don't know if MegaEth works. And then it got taken down.
No.
So yeah, not sure. Like I think the experiment should be run. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy that they're seeing excitement. Like hopefully they get some good apps. Like at the end of the day, my opinion on them is the same as every L2. Is I think there's a fundamental like bottleneck when you split the atomic unit of a transaction into network hops in between them, rather than being on like a single chip. Basically, it's like I still always go back to the fact that like, why would you put your like DA on a monolithic chain is how fast you can read from the hard drive. DA on an L2 is how fast you can like communicate over a network, which is necessarily gated at like 150 milliseconds, right? Just because of the speed of light around the world. And so like, to me, it's like, okay, well, you need DA to make a transaction and there's a delay in there. And now you have to make all these workarounds to do it. And that's the same for every L2, right? Whether it's MegaEth or someone else. And so like, I just go back to like, generally, I don't think L2s are great for non-logically separated use cases. I do think when your use case is logically separated like a game, it makes a lot of sense, right? But if you're trying to be like a composable layer for DeFi, but I think that is what like MegaEth is trying to be. It's trying to be like the one L2. I do think that there's just like a lot of security stuff that's like shoved under the rug there and not worked out. That like people just kind of glaze over because they don't know how L2s work, like in the detailed parts of it. And like, we'll see. But like, I wish them the best, you know, at the end of the day, like we're all trying to do the same thing in crypto. So we'll see. Like we worked a year and a half to build our community and I don't think you can fork that. Like, you know, whether what one Twitter poll says or anything, like I saw the French nads in ECC and like, that is a community, let me tell you. And so like, yeah, like you can't fork that. And so like at the end of the day, it's, you know, wish them the best. I hope they can build their community as strong as we built ours. But I don't think you can win. I think like the Monad community is very much like transitioning to in-person from online. Like, whereas like online was very much over the last year and a half, we were having community meetups, you know, every week. There was, you know, there's a Vietnam's one, there's a Thailand one, there's a Japan one, there's, you know, the French Nads one in ECC was crazy. Like we were in this bar and like downstairs, there was all like stand up, you know, have drinks. And then upstairs, it was like a seating area. And like all these French nads had like just met themselves and they all go upstairs and they start playing drinking games. And like a couple of us are downstairs talking and the entire bar is just rumbling as they're just like, it's just like having, like, you can't fork that. Like that's real community, right? You know, and then they all like went to the casino and then they went and played like, you know, karaoke with Keone, like at the end of the night. Like, and it was just such an experience for them that they're like addicted to Monad and they're coming back and they're going to be building here. Their friends are here. Like, you can't fork that. And so like we're seeing this in all sorts of reasons around the world. And so like maybe they're just going in person and they don't want to spend as much time online now that they've made their friends. So like I don't know, but like I'm not worried. Like,
Just a couple additional thoughts there. I completely agree that MegaEth seems to me like a complete capitulation by ETH people that their approach to scaling will not work. And they've given up on every value that seemingly mattered to them, specifically around centralization. That used to be the biggest dig at Solana folks and say it's a centralized chain. Well, guess what? This is incredibly centralized. Very interesting. Clearly, it's just seeing the progress that Monad made and some of these high throughput chains have made. They're trying to find a way to now retcon that story into like, oh no, that was the whole point of ETH L1 all along, was to support these centralized fast chains. That is in no way the case. It's very interesting to see. It suggests a lot of desperation. I mean, Vitalik threw a check into this, so it seems like it's now the anointed kind of way they're going to go. We'll see how it shakes out, but it is not. It does not make me that bearish ecosystem, meaning where people build stuff. It's now gotten even more crowded, so to speak. There's just so many L2s at this point. And what is the point of ETH for MegaEth? Like, I just still don't really understand, and I don't think any developers can ever understand what the point is, from the DA perspective, which you mentioned, right? The blocks are 10, 15 seconds. Like, how on earth does this actually functionally work with security guarantees? To me, it doesn't. It seems very hastily kind of put together bolt-on solution to ETH is just stick Monad on ETH or stick whatever, insert any kind of high throughput approach that uses specialized nodes and other design patterns that have clearly worked on fast chains like Solana. But I'm not really sure how this makes any sense.
To play devil's advocate for MegaEth here, to give him a little defense here, is like, they say that like they don't have to deal with consensus and all that stuff, so they can just like juice stuff, which at some level is true, and they are doing like some actual engineering work. Like there's some good PhDs on the MegaEth team, like doing some real good PhD work. I still just don't think you get around the fundamental. Like, you're an L2, like you are bottlenecked by the L1, and if you're not using the L1 as DA, like, then you're not an L2 in the classic sense. Like, you're not a roll up in the sense that like ETH had envisioned, right? And so like, yeah,
You're
I
functionally
won't
an
say
L1 then, no?
I
They even call themselves a blockchain in the white paper. They never call themselves an L2. And to me, it just feels like this is now ETH. We're starting from scratch, and this is how we want to build it. I don't disagree. I'm sure the team is great. I'm sure the chain is great. My point is, this has nothing to do with how ETH intended to scale. It feels like they're just giving up on that. And maybe one day this will be considered the place to, canonical ETH. And I just don't see what the connection to the L, like, what is the point of ETH if this is what you think the future of ETH is?
I think that it was an underappreciation, certainly during this last bear market, about the need for things to be fast and to be cheap. And in fact, it was almost ridiculed. It was quite a common thing you'd see on Twitter where people would say fast and cheap does not equal good, as if it's not the basis of basically every other technology and every other user experience that you have online, in any other industry. So yeah, I think they have dropped the ball. I think they've realized that, and we're now starting to see these attempts. Obviously, you can say this is a decentralized ecosystem. Anyone can build anything. But as you say, the Vitalik check going in towards MegaEth, that does bestow a lot of gravitas and suggest that is the way forward it's going to go. The other thing I want to say is there's now also discussions around the L1 that they should reduce block times, I think, to around 2 seconds. I think we've seen it from a couple of people recently, and just to start juicing the hardware potentially, or just do it on the software if that's possible. But one imagines the hardware would also need to go up as well. So I think it's the Solana effect. I think they're starting to realize how far behind they're going to be if they're going to go from their original roadmap. And yeah, they're having to start throwing darts at the board and trying to get up so that they can offer an equivalent experience to Solana.
I actually do like seeing that, though. Like, from a Monad perspective, like some of these changes that they're like proposing for the next fork, I would have never thought they would get into ETH for, years. And the fact that this pressure is creating them to like change those things about the EVM is like hella bullish for me. Because we're like, as Monad, we're like, hell yeah, like this is great. Like, we can then like move forward and implement those changes to stay EVM equivalent, but it's actually just good in general for the EVM, right? I think if you look at the history of hard forks on the EVM, they've always been consensus changes, very, very, very few execution changes. And like a lot of the proposed stuff in the next hard fork are execution changes. So I'm like, yes, that is great. But I definitely do think it's pressure from outside fast change, such as Solana, that is like force this, but that's good. I mean, it's good for the advancement of the EVM in general. I do think that people like forget that like L2s were created so that ETH, the asset, has security on a faster chain. Not so that L2 assets have security, like on their L2. It is so that your L1 assets have fork choice on the L1, even existing in another ecosystem, right? And so even though all these L2s may be faster, like to really inherit the security guarantees of the L1, the asset has to come from the L1. That is where their fork choice is, right? And so being able to transact very fast in Ethereum on an L2 makes sense. But if you're like an app launching on an L2 who wants to have a token, like you're not inheriting the security for your token unless your fork choice is on the L1, right? Like the L2 can choose to settle to a different settlement contract at any point in time. Now, like the L1 will consider like the original contract the canonical one, but the L2 can move over. It has full choice, right? And that's the whole reason the L2s were built, is to protect Ethereum, the asset, coming from the L1, so that if the L2 were to decide to go to a different settlement contract, all the L1 assets could still say, no, I only believe the first one. But if your asset's not native on the L1, you don't get that guarantee.
Yeah, because if you wanted to recreate like a pump.fun on one of these L2s, which I'm sure is the dream for some people, as you say, those assets are not secure. And also this just leads into the absolute like bipolar nightmare that is L2s, because in this world, ideally you would know which are all the assets which originated from the L1 because they are secure, and which are the assets which originated on the L2 because they aren't. And somehow you have to try and segregate that so people actually understand the risks that they're taking by interacting. Yeah, it's not good.
I mean, for Ethereum, the asset, it makes sense. Like that's the whole point
Yeah.
of L2s, is to secure Ethereum, the asset, on these other sense.
But is it the same if it's like Link issued on the L1 and then it's being transferred over to the L2, presumably?
Yeah, as long as it's
also getting
issued on the
same-
L1, as long as the fork choice is on the L1, you do actually inherit the security. It's just that, like you're saying, if there's a pump.fun because that's the, let's say that's the SocialFi use case on the L2, right? You're not inheriting the security of the L1 for those L2 native assets.
Yep, very good points made by Zen about the L2s. And I think that's a good stopping point. We covered a lot of topics today, and excited to get into the next set when we get back together in a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a closing point on it, like we're not anti-L2 and Monad. Like we do want to see L2s on Monad. It's just that like they make sense for certain use cases, and I think people over-index on just wanting to put everything on it. It's the same thing as like don't put everything on chain, right? Like you were making with the SocialFi apps. It's like don't put everything on L2 just because it's an L2.
Wise words, wise words.